Welcome. Today we look back at one of the most defining events in human history, World War II. This was a conflict that reshaped nations, transformed societies, and changed the role of the United States in the world forever. What follows is not a story of heroes and villains alone, but a record of decisions, sacrifices, and consequences that continue to shape our present. This is the story of World War II. The war no one notices. In World War II, not every American soldier fought with a rifle raised. Some fought with shovels, wire cutters, explosives, and bare hands. They did not charge enemy positions for glory. They went forward first so others could survive. These men were the combat engineers, the soldiers who built the path to victory while standing in its line of fire. American combat engineers were trained to do two opposite things at once: create and destroy. They built bridges, roads, airstrips, and fortifications. They also blew up obstacles, cleared mines, breached wire, and collapsed enemy defenses. Their work decided whether tanks advanced or stopped, whether infantry crossed a river or died on its banks, whether an attack succeeded or failed. Engineers did not wait behind the front. They moved with it or ahead of it. When infantry halted under fire, engineers crawled forward to clear mines. When tanks reached a river, engineers entered the water first. When a beachhead formed, engineers removed obstacles while shells exploded around them. Their battlefield was not defined by enemy contact alone, but by urgency. Training for engineers emphasized versatility. A combat engineer was expected to fight as infantry if necessary, then immediately switch roles. One moment he might be firing a rifle to suppress enemy fire. The next, he was cutting wire or planting explosives. There was no separation between combat and labor. The work happened under the same bullets. Equipment defined their identity. Engineers carried demolition charges, Bangalore torpedoes, mine detectors, wire cutters, axes, and shovels. These tools made them essential and marked them as targets. The enemy understood quickly. Kill the engineers, and the advance stops. Bridges remain intact. Mines stay buried. Obstacles hold. This knowledge shaped everything engineers did. Speed mattered more than safety. Hesitation meant others died waiting. Engineers learned to move forward despite fear, because delay was deadlier than exposure. Many later said they never felt heroic, only necessary. The war introduced engineers to environments that punished mistakes instantly. On beaches, they worked in open sand under machine gun fire, clearing obstacles while waves hit their legs. In Europe, they crossed rivers swollen by rain and combat debris. In the Pacific, they cut paths through jungle, coral, and volcanic rock, often within meters of enemy positions. Their casualties were high. Engineers were often among the first killed in assaults, not because they fought recklessly, but because they stood where the danger was unavoidable. Clearing mines meant kneeling in exposed ground. Building bridges meant standing in open water. Breaching wire meant approaching obstacles the enemy covered deliberately. Yet without engineers, none of the famous advances of the war would have happened. Normandy would have stalled on the beaches. Tanks would have been trapped by rivers and craters. Airfields would not have existed close enough to support advances. Engineers turned chaos into movement. Combat engineers lived in constant contradiction. They built under destruction. They created safety while risking their own lives. Their success was invisible, measured not in enemy casualties, but in roads that existed, bridges that held, and advances that did not stop. Most soldiers remembered engineers not for speeches or medals, but for moments of relief. The sound of a bridge finally holding weight. The sight of tanks crossing where minutes earlier there was only water. The knowledge that someone had gone ahead and made the way possible. This was the engineers' war, a war fought with tools instead of trophies, with precision instead of noise, with consequences that rippled forward long after the work was done. And this was only the beginning. Normandy. Clearing the beaches. Under fire. On June 6, 1944, American combat engineers stepped onto the beaches of Normandy with a task that allowed no delay. Infantry could take cover. Tanks could wait offshore. Engineers could not. The obstacles blocking the beaches had to be cleared immediately, or the invasion would collapse under its own weight. Every minute mattered. Every mistake was fatal. The beaches were engineered to kill. Rows of steel hedgehogs, wooden stakes tipped with mines, ramps designed to flip landing craft, and wire entanglements covered the sand. German machine guns and artillery were positioned to fire directly onto these obstacles. Engineers knew this before landing. Their job was to remove the barriers while standing in the most exposed ground on the battlefield. Engineers landed in the first waves. Many were hit before reaching the sand. Others drowned under the weight of explosives and equipment. Those who survived moved forward instinctively, not waiting for orders that would never arrive. They ran, crawled, and knelt in open fire to place charges, cut wire, and mark safe lanes for following troops. Explosives were prepared under fire. Bangalore torpedoes were pushed beneath wire, while bullets snapped overhead. Satchel charges were placed against steel obstacles with shaking hands forced steady by training. Engineers lit fuses knowing they might not reach cover in time. Some did not. Their work continued anyway, carried on by the next man who reached the obstacle. Communication was nearly impossible. Smoke, noise, and chaos erased coordination. Engineers relied on pre-planned markings, flags, tape, and visual signals to indicate cleared paths. These lanes allowed tanks and vehicles to move inland instead of piling up on the beach under fire. When lanes were not cleared, traffic jammed, and casualties multiplied. Medics and engineers often worked side by side. Wounded men lay exposed on open sand. Engineers stepped over bodies to reach obstacles because stopping meant the next wave would die. This was not indifference. It was triage at the scale of an army. The mission came before everything else. Losses were severe. Engineer units took some of the highest casualty rates of D-Day. Leaders fell early. Men took over without hesitation. Rank dissolved. Whoever was alive and moving did the work. Courage was not loud or dramatic. It was kneeling in open fire and finishing the job before the fuse burned down. By mid-morning, gaps began to appear in the defenses. Tanks moved through cleared lanes. Infantry followed. The beachhead stabilized. What had been an impossible barrier hours earlier became a path forward, because engineers had done their work under conditions few could survive. The success of Normandy did not come from a single breakthrough or heroic charge. It came from thousands of small acts of precision carried out under fire. Engineers turned a killing field into an entry point. Without them, the invasion would have stalled and possibly failed. For the men who survived that morning, Normandy never ended. The sound of waves and gunfire followed them for the rest of the war, and for many the rest of their lives. They had stood where movement meant life and delay meant death, and they had made the way forward possible. But Normandy was only the first test. As the invasion pushed inland, the engineers' war shifted from beaches to rivers, roads, and towns, each presenting new dangers and new demands. Rivers, bridges, and the race to keep moving. Once the Allied armies pushed inland from Normandy, the war became a race measured in hours. Speed mattered, but speed depended on something fragile and easily destroyed: infrastructure. Rivers, canals, blown bridges, and cratered roads became the enemy's last reliable defenses. Wherever German forces retreated, they left water and rubble behind. And wherever the advance stopped, combat engineers were called forward. Engineers learned quickly that a river could kill an advance faster than any enemy unit. Tanks stalled at banks. Infantry crowded exposed crossings. Artillery could not move forward. German gunners targeted these choke points deliberately, knowing that an army stopped at a river was an army vulnerable to counterattack. Engineers were ordered to cross first, often before the far bank was secure. Pontoon bridges became lifelines. Under fire, engineers unloaded rubber boats, steel pontoons, and prefabricated bridge sections. Men waded into cold water carrying heavy components while shells burst nearby. Currents pulled at equipment. Explosions threw water skyward. Engineers worked by muscle memory, assembling bridges piece by piece, knowing that delay meant more casualties behind them. Building under fire required discipline beyond instinct. Engineers could not rush blindly. Measurements had to be exact. Anchors had to hold. A bridge that failed under load could drown men and equipment alike. Precision mattered even when bullets did not stop. Engineers learned to compartmentalize fear, focusing on bolts, ropes, and alignment, while chaos raged around them. In many cases, bridges were built at night. Darkness offered concealment, but introduced new dangers. Equipment was harder to handle. Mistakes were easier to make. German patrols and artillery still hunted crossings. Engineers worked with minimal light, guided by touch and whispered commands. Sleep was impossible. Fatigue accumulated until hands shook and judgment blurred. When bridges could not be built quickly, engineers improvised ferries. Rubber boats shuttled infantry across while tanks waited. Each crossing exposed men to fire. Casualties mounted. Engineers marked crossing points carefully, guiding units through smoke and confusion. Once a bridge was up, traffic surged forward immediately, often before engineers could rest or even step away. Roads presented their own challenges. Retreating German forces cratered highways, collapsed culverts, and mined likely routes. Engineers cleared debris, filled craters, and rerouted traffic under constant pressure. Mines had to be detected and removed manually, often with crude tools. A single mistake could kill the man kneeling inches from the device. Engineers were also responsible for destroying infrastructure when ordered. Sometimes bridges had to be blown to slow German counterattacks. Sometimes roads had to be blocked to channel enemy movement. The same men who built crossings one day might destroy them the next. The work demanded flexibility and emotional distance, creation and destruction without hesitation. As the advance accelerated across France and into Belgium, the tempo became relentless. Engineers moved almost continuously. They rarely slept near the front. When one crossing was complete, orders came for the next. Rivers blurred together: the Vire, the Seine, the Meuse. Each presented unique challenges, but the pattern remained the same. Engineers first, danger unavoidable. Casualty rates stayed high. Engineers were exposed longer than infantry, because their work could not be rushed to completion. A bridge half built was useless. A minefield half cleared was deadly. Engineers stayed until the job was finished, or they were removed by force. For the soldiers waiting behind them, engineers represented relief. The sound of hammers, engines, and cables meant movement would resume. Tanks would cross. Supplies would flow. The war would continue forward instead of stalling in exposed ground. Engineers rarely advanced with the lead units. They followed close behind, always catching up, always fixing what the enemy tried to break. Their success was measured not in territory gained, but in momentum preserved. As the front moved east and the weather worsened, the engineers' burden grew heavier. Winter would test their endurance even more severely, and the most difficult crossings were still ahead. Mines, traps, and the hidden war underfoot. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Europe, the battlefield became increasingly deceptive. Not every danger announced itself with gunfire or explosions. Many waited silently beneath the ground, inside doors, under rubble, and along roads that looked untouched. For American combat engineers, this invisible threat became a daily reality. Mines and booby traps turned progress itself into a gamble. German forces mined everything they abandoned. Roads, bridges, fields, buildings, stairwells, and even corpses were wired to kill. Retreating units left behind belts of anti-tank mines to stop armor and anti-personnel mines to maim infantry and engineers alike. The intent was clear: slow the advance, exhaust manpower, and force engineers to expose themselves. Mine clearing was slow, meticulous, and terrifying. Engineers worked on hands and knees, probing soil with bayonets or specialized detectors that were often unreliable in wet or debris-filled ground. Every movement had to be deliberate. A slip, a stumble, or a moment of distraction could cost a leg or a life. Engineers learned to control breathing, to keep hands steady, and to shut out everything but the square foot of ground in front of them. Booby traps multiplied the danger. German defenders wired grenades to doors, rigged artillery shells beneath floorboards, and attached tripwires to everyday objects. A helmet on a table, a chair in an empty room, a rifle leaning against a wall. Engineers learned never to assume safety. Clearing a building took longer than assaulting it because every step had to be checked. Winter made detection harder. Snow concealed tripwires and pressure plates. Frozen ground interfered with detectors. Mines shifted position as soil expanded and contracted. Engineers cleared paths through white fields, knowing that danger lay inches beneath the surface. Infantry and armor waited behind them, exposed until lanes were marked safe. Marking cleared paths was as important as clearing them. Engineers used tape, flags, chalk, and signs to guide following units. A missed marker could send a vehicle or patrol into uncleared ground with fatal results. Engineers double-checked their work repeatedly, knowing that their responsibility did not end when the last mine was removed. Psychological strain mounted. Unlike direct combat, mine warfare offered no release. There was no exchange of fire, no immediate reaction. Death came silently, suddenly, and often without warning. Engineers witnessed comrades vanish in a flash, leaving nothing but smoke and debris. The randomness was brutal. Skill reduced risk, but never eliminated it. Despite this, engineers continued forward. They cleared miles of road and countless buildings under pressure to keep the advance moving. Commanders depended on them to maintain momentum. Infantry trusted their markings with their lives. Tanks rolled forward only when engineers said it was safe. Engineers also improvised when time did not allow careful clearing. Explosive charges were used to detonate suspected minefields from a distance. Bulldozers pushed debris aside, risking destruction to create quick paths. These methods saved time but increased danger. Engineers balanced speed against survival constantly. The hidden war underfoot slowed the advance more effectively than many enemy units. Every delay exposed troops to artillery and counterattack. Engineers felt this pressure acutely. They worked knowing that hesitation could cost lives elsewhere on the line. By late 1944, engineers had become experts in deception themselves. They learned to recognize patterns, to read the enemy's intent, and to anticipate traps before triggering them. Experience saved lives, but only after others had paid the price to gain it. Mines did not distinguish between soldier and civilian. Engineers cleared towns knowing that children might return to these streets after the war. This added another layer of responsibility. Their work was not only about winning battles, but about making places livable again. The hidden war never stopped. Even as German resistance weakened, mines continued to kill and maim. Engineers would be among the last to leave any battlefield because their work continued after the fighting moved on. As winter deepened and the front slowed, engineers faced their next ordeal, holding ground and building under the harshest conditions imaginable. Winter warfare. Building and surviving in the cold winter transformed the engineers' war into a battle against nature as much as the enemy. Cold did not pause operations, it magnified every task. Steel stiffened, wood cracked, explosives behaved unpredictably, hands numbed and tools slipped. Yet bridges still had to be built, roads still cleared, and mines still removed, often under fire, always against the clock. Frozen ground made digging nearly impossible. Engineers used picks, explosives, and sheer force to cut foxholes, anchor bridge supports, and expose buried charges. Each strike sent vibrations through numb arms. Mistakes increased as fatigue set in. A misjudged swing could detonate a device or shatter a tool needed for hours of work ahead. Snow concealed danger. Minefields disappeared beneath white fields that looked untouched. Tripwires vanished. Markers were buried or blown away by wind. Engineers learned to clear paths twice, once to remove the threat, and again to ensure it stayed visible. Infantry and armor waited in the open while lanes were remarked, knowing a single step off path could kill. Water crossings in winter were especially deadly. Rivers ran fast and cold. Ice broke without warning. Engineers waded into waist-deep water to place pontoons and anchors while shells burst nearby. Hypothermia was a constant risk. Men rotated through the water in minutes to avoid collapse, but rotation slowed construction, and time was a luxury they did not have. Vehicles struggled. Engines froze overnight. Fuel lines clogged. Tracks slipped on ice. Engineers improvised traction, cleared snow continuously, and kept routes open so supply convoys could move. When roads failed, armies stalled. The engineers' work kept momentum alive in conditions that favored defense. Shelter became a construction task. Engineers built warming tents, repaired roofs, and reinforced cellars to protect units from exposure. These structures were temporary, often crude, but they saved lives. Frostbite and exposure removed more soldiers from the line than bullets during prolonged cold spells. Building warmth was as critical as building bridges. Explosives demanded caution. Cold altered burn rates and reliability. Engineers adjusted fuses, tested charges, and recalculated distances. Detonations were timed with greater margins. balancing effectiveness against safety. Under fire, these calculations had to be made quickly and correctly. The psychological strain of winter was relentless. Darkness came early. Days blurred together. Work never truly ended. Engineers slept in fragments, waking to alarms, artillery, or the simple need to keep moving. Fatigue dulled judgment, making discipline essential. Teams enforced checklists and buddy systems to catch errors before they became fatal. Despite everything, engineers adapted. Procedures were simplified, tools were modified, teams specialized, experience reduced accidents even as conditions worsened. Winter did not break the engineers. It refined them. When the front slowed, engineers worked to prepare the next movement. Roads were reinforced, bridges strengthened, supply points established. The quiet hours of winter construction set the stage for spring advances that would collapse remaining resistance. Winter warfare proved a hard truth. Victory depended not only on defeating the enemy, but on enduring conditions that punished every weakness. Engineers endured by turning cold into another problem to be solved, methodically, collectively, and without pause. As the thaw approached, the engineers' workload did not lighten. The final push was coming, and with it, the most demanding tasks of all. The final push: speed, risk, and impossible deadlines. When winter loosened its grip, the engineers' war accelerated instantly. Commanders demanded speed. Deadlines shrank from days to hours. The front began to move faster than plans could be drawn, and the responsibility for keeping that movement alive fell squarely on the engineers. Roads had to exist where none were. Bridges had to hold before dawn. Minefields had to vanish before the next column arrived. German resistance was collapsing unevenly. Some units surrendered. Others fought with desperation. This unpredictability made every task dangerous. Engineers could not assume a cleared area would remain safe. Artillery still fell on crossings. Snipers targeted work parties. Mines appeared in places already passed. The work required constant vigilance layered on top of exhaustion. River crossings multiplied. Engineers refined their craft to a near-scientific precision. Pontoon sections were unloaded in exact order. Teams moved by muscle memory, assembling spans, while shells burst nearby. Smoke screens were laid to mask construction, but smoke also obscured signals and increased the risk of mistakes. A misaligned section could doom a bridge under load, sending vehicles and men into the water. The pressure to finish quickly was relentless. Infantry crowded banks waiting to cross. Tanks idled, exposed, engines running. Supply trucks backed up for miles. Engineers felt the weight of thousands of lives, and the entire tempo of the war pressing down on each bolt tightened and cable secured. Speed saved lives, but rushing could kill more. Mines and traps intensified along likely routes of advance. Retreating enemy units seeded roads, crossroads, and towns with devices meant to delay and maim. Engineers cleared under the clock, sometimes using explosive line charges or bulldozers to force paths when careful work would take too long. These methods were dangerous, but delays were deadlier. Urban areas posed unique challenges. Rubble-blocked streets. Basements collapsed. Utilities created hidden hazards. Gas leaks. Live wires. Unstable structures. Engineers stabilized buildings enough for troops to pass, shored up crossings over canals, and marked routes through labyrinths of debris. Every solution was temporary, designed to last just long enough for the army to move on. Coordination became tighter than ever. Engineers worked directly with artillery, armor, and infantry to synchronize tasks. A bridge went up as guns suppressed the far bank. A road opened as infantry secured flanks. Timelines overlapped. There was no slack. Success depended on everyone doing their part at exactly the right moment. Casualties continued. Engineers were hit while measuring spans, carrying charges, and probing soil. Replacement crews stepped in immediately. The work did not stop. Losses were absorbed because the mission could not pause. The engineers' culture finished the job, held under the most intense pressure of the campaign. As Allied forces crossed the Rhine and surged into the heart of Germany, the pace became breathtaking. Engineers leapfrogged forward, dismantling obstacles as quickly as the enemy could create them. The sense grew that the end was near, but experience warned against complacency. The final miles could be the deadliest. Through it all, the engineers maintained focus. They did not celebrate breakthroughs. They prepared for the next task. When a crossing held, they moved to the next river. When a road opened, they cleared the next intersection. Momentum was their measure of success. The final push proved what the engineers had always known. Wars are won not only by defeating enemies, but by meeting deadlines that seem impossible, and doing so under fire. The front was racing toward its conclusion. One chapter remains before the end. What happened when the work finally slowed, and what the engineers carried home. After the fighting, clearing, repairing, and the weight of silence. When organized resistance finally collapsed, the engineers were not relieved. They were redirected. The guns grew quieter, but the danger did not vanish. In many ways, the work became more delicate and more haunting. The war had torn the land apart, and someone had to make it passable again. That someone was the engineers. Clearing operations began immediately. Mines remained everywhere, on roads, in fields, inside buildings, beneath bridges that had miraculously survived. The absence of gunfire made the threat feel sharper, not smaller. There was no noise to distract from the sound of a probing rod touching metal. No urgency of incoming fire to narrow focus. Silence magnified fear. Engineers cleared routes for occupation forces, relief convoys, and returning civilians. Each cleared meter mattered now, not for momentum, but for safety. A missed device could kill a child, a farmer, or a soldier days after the war had ended. Responsibility shifted from enabling advance to preventing pointless death. Repair replaced destruction. Bridges that had been rushed up under fire were reinforced to last. Roads were resurfaced. Rail lines were cleared and reconnected. Utilities were stabilized. Engineers worked in ruined cities among collapsed buildings and twisted infrastructure, often alongside civilians who watched with a mix of relief and disbelief. The emotional weight increased. Engineers encountered mass destruction at close range. Neighborhoods flattened, factories gutted, towns emptied. Evidence of the regime's crimes surfaced everywhere. Forced labor sites, camps, and graves. The work continued in the presence of suffering that had no tactical solution. Fixing a bridge did not fix what had happened there. Units began to thin as demobilization loomed. Men who had worked side by side under fire were reassigned or sent home in stages. Goodbyes were brief and practical. Engineers understood that words could not summarize what they had shared. A nod, a handshake, a final shared task, that was enough. Fatigue surfaced fully now. During the advance, exhaustion had been masked by urgency. In silence, it settled into bones and memory. Engineers slept deeply and irregularly. Some found it hard to relax at all. Habits persisted, scanning ground, counting steps, checking hands. The war had trained them to see danger where others saw emptiness. Civilians returned to cleared roads and bridges without knowing who had made them safe. Engineers watched this quietly. Recognition was never expected. The measure of success was absence, the absence of explosions, of delays, of sudden loss. When nothing happened, the job had been done well. Paperwork followed. Maps were updated. Minefields marked and remarked. Reports written to ensure others would not repeat deadly mistakes. The engineers' war shifted from immediate action to institutional memory, capturing lessons so the next unit would survive what the last had learned the hard way. As months passed, the work slowed. Projects were handed off. Units prepared to leave. The land was still scarred, but it was passable. Movement resumed without constant fear. Silence became normal. For many engineers, this quiet was harder than combat. It left space for memory, faces of men lost to a misstep, a hidden device, a collapsing span. There were no medals that fit these moments. There was only the knowledge that the work had mattered. One chapter remains. What this unseen war meant, and why the engineer's legacy endures long after the roads were cleared and the bridges held. Legacy of the American Combat Engineer. The legacy of the American Combat Engineer is written in places where nothing dramatic seems to happen. A bridge that holds, a road that remains open, a field where no explosion follows a careless step. These absences are the engineer's signature. Their success is measured not by spectacle, but by continuity, by the simple fact that movement continues and lives are not lost. The first legacy is momentum. Engineers made modern, fast-moving warfare possible. Armies could not advance without crossings, routes, and cleared ground. Every delay increased casualties and invited counterattack. Engineers learned to compress time, turning days into hours under fire. This ability to build and clear at speed became foundational to post-war military doctrine. The second legacy is precision under pressure. Engineering work does not allow approximation. A bridge either carries weight or it fails. A mine is either neutralized or it kills. Engineers brought a culture of checklists, verification, and redundancy into the most chaotic environments imaginable. This discipline saved lives when fear and fatigue would have made shortcuts tempting. The third legacy is dual mastery. Combat engineers proved that soldiers could be both builders and fighters without confusion. They fired rifles when necessary and picked up tools the next moment. This flexibility reshaped how armies thought about roles at the front, dissolving rigid boundaries between combat and support. The fourth legacy is ethical responsibility. Long after gunfire ceased, engineers continued to work so civilians could return safely. Clearing mines and traps was not about victory anymore. It was about preventing meaningless death. This shift from enabling destruction to enabling recovery gave the engineers' work a moral dimension that endured into peace. On a human level, the cost was permanent. Engineers carried memories of kneeling in exposed ground, counting seconds on fuses, feeling the tremor of near misses while tightening bolts in cold water. Many never spoke about these moments. Their pride lay in the work itself, not in recognition. After the war, engineers returned home and quietly rebuilt the world. Skills honed under fire, planning, teamwork, precision, translated into civilian construction infrastructure, and industry. Roads, bridges, and buildings rose in peacetime shaped by hands that had once built them in war. Modern military engineering traces a direct line to these experiences. Doctrine, equipment, and training all reflect lessons learned when failure meant immediate loss. The emphasis on safety, verification, and adaptability remains a hallmark of the profession. The American combat engineer did not win battles by defeating enemies face to face. He won them by making victory possible for everyone else. He stood where delay was deadliest and worked until movement resumed. He accepted risk so others could pass safely. World War II ended with armies moving freely across continents because someone had cleared the way. That someone was the engineer. And when the roads stayed open and the bridges held, the work spoke for itself. World War II reshaped the world we live in today. Its victories, losses, and lessons remind us of the cost of global conflict and the value of cooperation. By remembering this history, we honor those who lived through it and better understand the world they left behind. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.